Hello, Michael here from Small Robot Studio with another Metahumans and Unreal 5 tutorial. And in this tutorial, we're going to be looking at how to do some basic lip sync and what the total workflow will be if you're starting out. So before we begin bringing in audio into Maya, we need to make sure that we understand how it works and maybe do some cleanup. So Audacity is a good option if you don't want to spend any money for doing some light audio editing. It's very simple to use. All you need to do is drag your audio into it, and there it is. So you'll see it currently is 2 tracks because it's in stereo in this particular case. In terms of selecting audio, I'd recommend choosing for your first time a male because their waveform tends to show up a little bit more prominently with lower frequencies. You'll see a little bit more variation, as well as picking an actor that enunciates well. Classically trained actors tend to do something like that. So if you find some recordings of Shakespeare or want to pull maybe a couple of lines out of Hamlet, that might be a good one. For me, what I've chosen is Matt Berry's character in Garth Marenghi's Dark Place, and you may be familiar with the line. Here it is.
You and he were buddies, weren't you?
And this is a good one because it's nice and clear. The words are nicely separated and nicely enunciated. And with this waveform, you can see some nice peaks. We also have this area here, which has got the synth, which obviously we do not need to do any animation for. And we could actually delete these things. So your audio is not going to be as cleaned up as this. This is already cleaned up. But if you did bring it in, you can just left click and drag and delete parts you don't want. Or if you didn't want the synth there, I could go in through there and generate silence. And that will silence it there.
You and he were buddies, weren't you?
But because the synth is in the background while he's speaking, we obviously can't remove that, so I'm going to leave it there for now. My last piece of advice with the audio is that you choose something that's nice and short, a couple of words. This is like 7 words. So that is going to take you maybe a couple of hours to animate your first time, but I'm going to simplify it enough that you can probably get there on your first go pretty quickly. Expect that your first time is obviously going to be your worst time, so it's good to pick something nice and short. Let's not do all of Hamlet. Let's just do 1 or 2 to be or not to be's, something like that. And before we have a look at interpreting the audio, I'd like to take a moment to talk about today's sponsor, which is Class Creatives. They offer a top-ranked game design curriculum online. You can learn from experts in the field who have also got experience teaching at accredited universities. All courses are taught by seasoned professionals who have worked for companies such as Disney Animation, Naughty Dog, Insomniac Games, Sony, Google, and more. In their masterclass courses, the full character animation workflow is covered from start to finish. Character animation fundamentals emphasize the value of video references to bring characters to life utilizing Autodesk Maya and Unreal Engine. Extensive character rigging courses teach the process of how to custom rig characters for all your project needs. The great thing about Class Creatives is the ability to learn at your own pace and on your own schedule. Get started today for free with the link in the description or above. Thanks Class Creatives for sponsoring this video. Now we need to know a couple of things about interpreting audio because we can't actually tell what these words are, but we need to know what these different shapes represent. So if you've never touched audio in any way, shape or form, which I know many of you won't have, we'll just have a little bit of a look as to what everything is. So a common audio engineering term is ADSR, and what that stands for is attack, decay, sustain, and release. So these are all represented in waveforms here, and we can actually have them all here in this case. In normal dialogue, we won't see much sustain, and sustain is a held frequency like this. So that's the synth, obviously, making that occur. The next part is that we'll look at is attack, and attack is the length of time it takes for a sound to get to its transient. A transient is the peak of the sound. So if you think of a drum, when you hit a drum skin, the sound or the moment that the stick touches the skin is not the loudest moment, because obviously the sound has to build up to its frequency as the sound waves are rattling around inside the shell and they get to your ear. It doesn't go from 0 to 100% of its volume immediately. There is a time that it takes, and it's usually a fraction of a second or a frame or 2. We can see it here at the start. That's the synth beginning, and this would be him saying you. So That's the start of the word you. Another good example is were.
Were.
And were has both the attack, which is here, going from the start of the W sound up to the transient, and then this is the release. So as the sound is disappearing. And this is all important. We're going to be talking about this a bit more as we're animating some of these words in a moment. And like I said, this is the sustain. We will see sustain in singing a lot more than we would see it in spoken dialogue. There are some instances where characters or actors will stretch out words for effect. Matt Berry does it for comedic effect in this piece of dialogue a little bit further on. So if you haven't seen it, make sure you check it out. So here we are in Maya with the Metahuman rig. If you're unsure on how to import and export Metahumans rigs with Maya and Unreal, I'd recommend watching my previous tutorial on the topic. It will help you out doing this whole process. So you should already be familiar with some of these controllers, obviously for the head and things like that. That's pretty straightforward. One thing that I would do on a lot of rigs if I was animating the face is freeze the controllers. They would normally be select those and then right click and go to freeze, and just freeze those inputs and outputs so they don't have any animation on them while we're trying to animate the lip sync. So the character's not wandering around and we have to keep following him with the camera. That can be annoying, obviously. With the advanced skeleton on this particular rig, it doesn't like it so much. So what I would recommend doing in this case would be to create a camera that snaps to your character's face. So we'll go to create cameras and we'll create a camera. And what I'll do here is I'll split the viewport, perspective on the left and the new camera on the right. So this camera, we will just move into position and we'll turn off joints. Okay, so we can see him, turn the lights on. All right, so what I will do with this camera is I'll set it to a relatively long focal length, we'll say 80, which will give us a fairly good amount of perspective compression on the face. And it is good to do this while the character is aligned to the grid. So at the moment the character is facing along the z-axis, y-axis up in this case, and looking directly into the camera. That's because we want to parent the camera to the head controller. So whenever he looks up, the camera looks up with him. So we select the head controller, we shift select the camera controller, then we'll go to the rigging area, go to constrain, parent with the option box, and we want to make sure translate, rotate, everything's on. You can hit reset settings and apply and close. So what that will do now is if we rotate the head, you'll see that that camera follows it no matter where he goes, including obviously with the body. That's always going to be on him. So that will make it a lot easier if you're trying to do something with these guys over here while he's jumping up and down and all over the place. Next, there's a couple of Maya settings that I would recommend changing if we're going to be doing this. First thing, I would have auto key on. That is my preference and I generally recommend it to people. Next, we'll go to the settings and preferences, which can be found by clicking this button down here, or you can go to Windows, Settings and Preferences, and click Preferences, and that's the same thing. We're going to go to the animation settings, and we're going to click the evaluation mode, go to parallel. If you're having issues, you might want to set it to serial, but I find that parallel works well with my computer. It will be different from computer to computer. Next, as always, we want to go to display, heads up display, and ensure we've got the frame rate on. This will allow us to make sure that we're always viewing the playback at the real-time frame rate. So in this case at 24 frames per second. It should be displaying at least 24 frames per second. Sometimes it will be showing more than that. That will still be real-time. Going back to settings and preferences, the next thing we'll do is go to the time slider, ensure we're set to 24:1. Update on all views if you can, if your computer can handle it. Otherwise, active is fine. I like to do it on all because sometimes I'll be looking at it from two different perspectives. Next, under the animation tab, we're going to go to tangents and we're going to set this to flat and the next one to stepped. This is going to be so while we're blocking out the animation, we're not seeing it in splined. If you're viewing your animation in splined, which is tweened, you might notice that. While you're timing it, you're seeing the timing of the in-between frames. You're not seeing the timing of the key poses. That's not a great workflow for animation. Unless you're very experienced, I wouldn't recommend animating like that. And even if you are experienced, I would find it weird to animate like that. So always beginning with flat and stepped. Next, we'll go down to the timeline here, right click on that, and we're going to go to cached playback and ensure this is off. If we have it on, the audio is going to be a bit glitchy when you're scrubbing. Sometimes on playback, it won't play back. And finally, we can import our audio. So we'll right click here, we'll go to the audio button, and then we're going to go to import audio. Navigate to where your audio is, select your WAV file. Remember, if you have saved it out as something other than in a WAV file, Maya will not be able to read it, and import. If it imports looking like this, we just need to make sure that the singular track is selected. So let's right click there, go to audio, and just make sure we select the one track that we want. You can have more than one track active in here if you want, but obviously as we're doing the lip sync for the specific track, we just want to be looking at this one. If we play back, should be able to hear that well enough. And you can hear it while you're scrubbing. Ensure that the audio is at the start, and if you need a bit more space to play with, we can offset this. So we'll right click here again, go to audio, and click the options box next to You and He Were Buddies. We can then set the silence to something like 5, and that will give you 5 frames of silence before it begins. Source start will bring it back, so if you hit 1, it's going to bring it back a frame, and you'll see that is actually cropping it to the silence. So generally you do actually want to know where your audio is before you start animating, so you can time it a little bit more easy. In this case, I'm just going to put 1 frame of silence just to make sure I've got that little bit of breathing room there. All right, so we're almost ready to start blocking out our Visemes, and so we haven't really talked about what Visemes are though, and they are your basic visual interpretations of sounds. Now this is different to phonemes, which you may already be familiar with. Phonemes is the phonetic sound of letters. Visemes is the shape that your mouth makes when you make certain sounds. This is not necessarily a singular letter, so there isn't a viseme for the letter P, for example, and that's because P, M, and B all pretty much do the same thing with your mouth. Your mouth closes. So that's your first viseme, BMP. That's a closed, wide mouth shape. The next shape is E, as in sheep or peep or edge or eat or end. Any sort of word with a pushed E sound will give you that wide E shape. The next shape is F or V, and that's with a slight overbite on your lower lip. Now, with all of these visemes, I should say that they are not prescriptive, they are more descriptive. So, for example, F is a good one. You can roll your lower lip in when you use the letter F, so like fair. You could also push your lower lip into your front teeth and say fear, like, or front, literally how I pronounce that. So some people do it both ways, some people do it one or the other way. For me, when I'm trying to exaggerate the F viseme on a character, if they're swearing, I can imagine an F word, I'm sure. I think that rolling the lower lip under the teeth looks a little bit more accentuated, so that might be a good opportunity there. The next shape is your U shape, so that is like tool or rule or cue or to, pool, those sorts of word where you get a round tunnel-like shape in your mouth. And finally, we've got the most common one, which is and that is a fairly relaxed mid-width open mouth. Which is like end, rest, send, relaxed. I did end earlier, and that's because I was emphasizing end. So end and can be an E sound, but it can also be an sound. And it is really important because you can go through a whole sentence and really be only hitting variations of the half width open mouth viseme. So it's important to keep that in mind. When you block out your visemes, a lot of them might actually end up going back to the shape viseme, or you might get them a little bit sort of in between that and like maybe the E wide or the F, V, or the U shape. So with keeping in mind, a lot of the time when you do go through a sentence, you will notice that if you just say a quick sentence like I'm doing now, I'm not really changing the width of my mouth too much. It's really just opening and closing. And the Fs and the Bs, obviously those ones don't vary as much because you can't really make a B sound without closing your mouth, obviously. So how do we set that up? We're here in Maya again, and what we're going to do is just quickly go through and set up a nice little control window. So we've already got the camera, which we set up in the first place. And what I like to do is split my viewport left and right. So we'll do that with this button here, and we'll put this camera to our camera that we already created. And I've got it set to square. You don't have to set it to that. You can have it set however you want. And then the right viewport, you need to find an angle that is pointing at your control board, which will depend on how you've imported the model and whether you've rotated it. Remembering that Metahumans are native Z up, and mine is my Maya viewport is set to Y up. So maybe different depending on how you've chosen to bring it in. It is important that we use an orthographic though. We don't really want to be seeing sort of perspective with this. And I do like to just sort of get it into place. You can lock it if you want, so it doesn't move around, but we only really need to see what's happening in this one for the moment. This is the important one. You can also lock your perspective viewport if you wish, though it should be locked to your head if you are doing that. And let's have a look at our controllers. So I'm not going to go through everything, we'll just sort of set this up. But there are three sort of thirds to the controller, the main control board, which is this one here on the left. And how I like to think of it is that we've got our brows up the top here, and these are some key emotional triggers that we have for our face. And then we've got the midsection, which is your eyes, including your squint and your nostril flares. And then finally, you've got the mouth, which is pretty much everything down here. This also includes the neck, and we do use neck muscles to do shapes like the E. That's actually pulled down the edges of your mouth. The lower edges, these ones here, are actually pulled down by your neck muscles. So worth considering using those sometimes as well. If you think of it like that, we know that we need to focus on here, and then there are specific ones that we will need to use. Common ones, if I open the jaw, I want to use this. We don't really want to mess too much with trying to mix up this if we're closing the jaw. This is if you are trying to lift the lower lip up. So focus on doing one thing for your major movements. Also, this is going to be a very basic setup. There is a lot more finessing we could do. So just for the sake of this tutorial, not going on for an hour and a half for just the Viseme portion, we're just going to keep it pretty basic, but you'll get most of what you need here. So the first one we're going to do is the B sound. And to do this, what I want to do is set my frame to -5 for the starting point. Because there is 5 Visemes that we're going to set up, they're going to be on -5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and 0. And we'll start on frame 1. You can go to -6 if you want. And then, actually, why don't we do that? We'll start with the -6, and then that way 0 is free in case you were starting on frame 0. So the B sound, that is pretty simple. It is a compression of the two lips together. You might be opening the mouth a little bit. Probably I would generally open the mouth a little bit because it's usually following on or preceding another Viseme. So it's a good idea to get that together. And then we can do a little bit of lip press, I like to do. Lip bite on the lower lip, which means it rolls in. And lips together, just a touch. So that's going to bring the lips together even though the jaw is open still, as you can see. Now we can actually, I don't have this one hooked into the character, so we can actually rotate around and see if that looks correct. We actually might want to do a little bit more tightening of the lips if we're looking at it from the side. And maybe for me, I might bite my upper lip just a little bit, or sort of more tension there than anything. And how you do this is really up to you. And this is a very important point that I would like to say, that it is really important for you to say the line yourself and feel how it feels to say it, because that, as you should be an animator, I'm assuming. So you are an animator, you should be acting out every single part that you animate. If you're not doing it, you're not doing a good job of animating. So shoot some reference of yourself saying it, or have a mirror and look at yourself in the mirror saying, you and he were buddies, weren't you? And so I'm thinking, buddies, that's how it should feel. And I actually feel, yeah, okay, I want a little bit more roll of this. And ultimately, I might increase or decrease it down the line for specific visemes during the dialogue. But for now, this is fine. All right, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually select all of these except for the we don't want to grab this little yellow one here. And I'm just going to hit S. And that's going to keyframe everything. And the reason I'm doing it on all of the mouth controllers is because we want those visemes to be flat and stepped between each other. So when we're tweening, if there is any difference in any one of them, it will tween regardless of whether there is keyframes or not. Now, ultimately, this might give you a little bit more cleanup to do, and you can choose whether or not you want to do it this way, or you can just keyframe the ones that you're actually moving. I just find it's generally a little bit quicker to lay out doing it this way. And the other advantage of that is we can just select everything here, and we'll just reselect the jaw, go to the channel box editor and zero that. That will zero everything out. If you select the jaw last there, that will allow you to do that pretty easily. Okay, so the next one is the E sound. And again, that is going to be the mouth open slightly. And we can already see it kind of feels like an E. This is an elongation of the outsides of the mouth. So we're going to select both of those and just draw them out. And you can see, yeah, that's looking a bit E-ish. We might want to do a little bit of that perhaps. And for me personally, I'd probably do a little bit of this. Now it can look like a bit of a smile, so you may want to be wary of that. With that smile happening, we can just bring these down a little bit more. Depends on the overall expression. We can use animation layers here if we want to make an overall smile or an overall sort of pout to the character. But for now, we'll just keep it fairly neutral. We're not worrying about the tongue, so don't worry about the tongue. Tongue happens last, and we can still go in here and decide if we want to open the mouth or not a little bit more. You might use a bit of this if you are that sort of person. I'm probably a little bit more like this for my ease, but this is pretty good. All right, let's zero those out again. So we'll select all those controllers, deselect the jaw and reselect it, and then both of those inputs and hit zero. Zeroes everything out. Everything is automatically keying to zero as well when I do that. So if, again, there is going to be separation in the teeth. If the teeth are separate, the jaw needs to be down. And this is going to be some lip bite. So we're going to roll this in, but we also want to lift it up. So we're lifting up the lower lips, and we'll also lift up the top lips, and we'll start to get a bit of an F sort of shape happening. Or there's F or V for vector. And we'll roll it around here, and we can see, yeah, this is what we want, or do we want to roll more? It's up to you. Because the shape of the mouth is a little bit too sort of overly there, sort of crescenty, I'm just going to neutralize that by bringing up those lips a little bit. And if you want, you could purse the lips a little. And you can see how that is making it look more intense. That's up to you. That's probably enough for a fairly neutral F viseme. The next shape is our U shape. So it's pretty standard. What you're expecting, that we are going to be using the mouth open like so. And we're going to funnel the mouth. I might open that a little bit more so we can exaggerate it. Funnel the mouth a little bit. Pursing, we'll bring the lips forward a little bit. So if I do that, you can see they come forward, and toward will exaggerate the lips toward. So if you're making a real ooh sound, you want to do something more like that. You don't want to ever basically get these controllers all the way to the end, particularly when you're just blocking in, because that means you've got no more headroom left when you're animating. So pretty much around 50% is fine, I would say, for most of the time. And then if you want to make more exaggeration or more subtlety, you've got 50% of room above and below that point. Now, some people might expose the upper teeth or might go a little bit smaller in their shape. I'll leave that up to you. If you're wanting a smaller shape of the lips, the last thing you can do there is just get the lips together controllers, and that will just bring those a little bit smaller, so you get a slightly smaller shape, which will give you some contrast between particularly this one and our next Viseme, which is the shape, the E-H-I-H-A-H shape. This is going to be a little bit more on your lips, so we'll zero everything out again, and we'll start by opening the mouth, and we're just going to compare the ooh, because we don't want to make it too much like that. So this, what we're going to do is we're going to bring these two ones down here, just a touch, and maybe funnel a touch, and that's just creating some barreling of the lips, and then we'll purse, and let's have a look. Yeah, you can hear me doing it to see how it feels. You may go a little bit more upper teeth visible, something like that, and that will give you some nice contrast to your ooh, which has got a little bit more lower teeth. And also more tension at the edges of our mouth. So we could use some lip tighten, which is gonna, if we zoom in here, hopefully visible on the video, you can see the tensioning of the lips, and it's subtle, but it can help. So maybe just a touch of that. And because this is a really common one, we're probably going to end up adding lots of variations to it as we animate the lip sync. So bear that in mind. Okay, so that should be all of it. 5 key poses there. B, E, F, V, U, and And this could even be a bit more neutral, even like less of that maybe, now that I think about it. Just depends. Less is more really at this point. And do keep that in mind, because we're really just trying to get the basic shape of the lips in. Okay, so the next step is lining up our Visemes. So we should have already gone through and written up our Visemes and lined them up on a piece of paper. That's how I like to do it. Break down your Visemes into where they should line up with the waveform. If you want to go to screen cap of the waveform, you could do it that way, or you could just literally write the sentence out, put a line between each of the letters or words where you think the Viseme is, and do it that way. This doesn't have to be exactly correct. I know when I did it, it wasn't right. There was a couple of extra ones that I wanted to add in, or I changed an ooh sound to an That happens, and that's totally fine. So the first time through isn't always going to be the best time through. So we're going to start with a neutral expression. I've just neutralized all of the controllers here just by selecting them all and setting them all to 0 as I did previously. And then we just need to go through and copy paste these Visemes onto our waveform along here. So we're going to start out with U, and that's going to be an EU sort of shape. So that is the E shape here. We'll copy that, and that's going to go about here. And what we'll probably actually do as well is not hit play blast ever, because it's not very useful. We'll copy this closed expression and we'll paste it maybe here. And what that will mean is that from the closed to the open, it's going to go EU. That's about where the ooh sound starts. So we're going to go to our ooh, which is the 4th one. This one here, we'll copy that and paste that there. Okay, so it already looks not bad. Let's go to the next one, which is going to be the N sound. So that's about there. So I'm going to grab the shape. So it's probably there or the frame before, if I'm being honest. Yeah, it doesn't hurt to play and scrub through a few times as you're doing this. I'll do it quite a lot, so I'll play backwards and forwards and just check. And that shape might even happen a little bit earlier, because it's going to go from the to more of an N, and with the N, the teeth might get close together, which we'll go over with some modifications to these Visemes a little bit later. So the were is a bit of a funny one. I have just got written out as an but it's actually an ooh, and then into an shape. So I know it's weird for me to be just making these noises, but you get used to it. So that's going to be our E shape. So we want to get that first actually. So we'll copy this one here, across. And then we'll go to our U shape. And then this is to our E shape again. Okay, so first thing we'll notice is that this E shape, much too exaggerated. Let's bring it in. And we might use this keyframe later on from now on and just say, hey, look, that E shape is too exaggerated overall. This is probably all we need, really. But that looks like it pretty much lines up. And this one here, like I said, it's going to be a modification. And just as a preview, this is probably what I'd do. A little bit of this. And I'll also neutralize the expression at the end here. Maybe not neutralize it completely. I might just sort of do this. Something like that. Because oftentimes as you're talking and if you're sort of between a thought or a sentence, you're not going to close your mouth every single time. So I'm not going to do the whole sentence sequence, but we will have a look at buddies because I think that's an interesting one. So let's grab our B shape and we'll paste this in here. So this is closed. Now the B that he's doing for buddies, he's exaggerating or anticipating the word buddies quite a lot. He's hitting it very hard. It's almost like he's humming the B sound. So he's kind of going B, buddies. So you can see it here on the waveform. You can see sort of that's the transient there, but we've almost got a sustain along there. So that's like a hum. And then that's your next transient for buddies, which is going to be into an sound again. So we'll just copy this one here. And we should see it.
Buddies.
Yeah, you can see. So we might just hold that B shape, even maybe here, go to it, hold, and then that's the transient there. That might end up being a frame earlier. When you are putting these in, again, if I haven't said it already, favor the frame before if you have to. For the transient or for where the sound occurs, it will make everything look like it's more in sync. If things are lagging, they're going to look really sloppy and bad, and your audience will notice. So I'm going to block the rest of this in now, and then we will have a look at adding some detail to each of the Visemes. Okay, so here's the full block in.
You and he were buddies, weren't you?
So this time we'll focus on the second half of the sentence. So we've got buddies. And buddies is a good one because we've got an E sound here, buddies, and then the S sound, or sort of a zingy S sound. That is going to be with a little bit more closing of the jaw to do that, because you sort of make the zing sound behind your teeth. So I would move your jaw up a little bit like that. Basically the same mouth shape, just with a little bit higher jaw. And I talked a little bit about chatteriness, and we can see a little bit of that happening here.
Buddies, weren't you?
So we're going from this almost shape, this sort of medium width mouth shape, to this medium width mouth shape with this narrow one in between. So I would say that we're going to take this out and maybe a little bit less of this, and maybe lower that a little bit. So you can sort of try and think about, like, it's trying to get from this Viseme to this one. Is this in between or is it not? If it's not in between, you might want to just make it a little bit more wider than this one, or close to the same width, and that'll make it look a little bit less chattery as he's talking. And when I say chattery, I mean like the mouth sort of chomping up and down. If there's too much contrast, it's not going to look very natural unless it's going from a very quiet sound to a very loud sound all of a sudden. A lot of this you won't notice until you're tweening, so don't stress out too much about it if you need to sort of go over a little bit more after this stage. But getting it to something that looks like about this is pretty much all you want. All right. And before we move out of blocking, we'll just have a look at the tongue briefly. It is best to keep the tongue fairly simple because most of the time you're not going to have a shot that's close enough to really see it. If you do have a close-up, then yeah, you can try and make it a bit more detailed, I guess. But in this particular one, we actually don't have a lot of percussive consonants that require the tongue. Percussive and the N would be one as well. So this is U in here. So this is for me. People will do this slightly differently depending on the person, but I would raise my tongue behind my front teeth. So I'm going to push it out a little bit or pull it out a little bit just so I can see it's forward and move it up. And that's going to be very subtle. If it's a wide mouth shape overall, you might set it a little bit more, like a lick might be a better one. This T here, you'd raise that up as well. So again, just lift the tongue up. And I'm just going to bring it out a touch so it feels like it's not that much, a little bit. So we can sort of see that it's touching the back of the front teeth. So we'll call that complete, and or I'll probably do a little bit more here, and then we'll have a look at the tweening. All right, so I've gone through, finished that up, and added some tweening, and it started to reveal some issues. And in terms of tweening, I'm just literally selecting everything here, graph editor, clicking the tweening button. If you don't have your graph editor docked like I do, Windows, animation editor, graph editor. You can dock it by dragging it in there. You can do each controller individually and add as much or as little weighting to it as you want. You can see I've not done anything here, and I haven't cleaned up yet either. Go through and clean up if I wanted to. Not just yet though, because we'd probably need to do a little bit of retiming. And so the retiming that I'm seeing will say, I think that ooh sound needs to happen a frame earlier. So we'll take those and we'll just middle mouse click and drag. So retiming during tweening, very common. And then at this point, once it's tweening, you'll probably notice really high contrast visemes. So like this E shape. So I probably want to make this E shape not so wide. So I'm just going to take this one down a bit. Yeah, I want to be pretty narrow on it, I think. Yeah, something like that. Another one where I'd say this could probably be a little bit wider, a little bit less purse. And because this is so quick from here to here, we just, again, if you're seeing this, just reduce how much things are moving. And we could even make this a little bit later. That could even be held if we wanted to. So we could take these keyframes here, copy, paste it, and then just do a little bit of translation on a couple of the controllers. Now that's going to be tweening between here and the next one. And you can see I've got some head movement in here as well. I have already animated this head completely. I've just been turning it off previously, as I discussed earlier. Do your big to small. Okay, so at this point, I just want to go through again and just keep looking for instances where the exaggeration or less exaggeration can be applied to the animation.
Won't you?
That's roughly correct. Now I'm going to go through and do a lot more tweening here, but those are the sort of steps that you want to look for. So making sure that the correct acting is being applied. So how much tension do I want with this B sound, along with using your animation principles? So anticipation, are we exaggerating afterwards? And you can see I'm reinforcing that with my major animation groups, which will be the body, which you should have already animated at this point anyway. Expressions will be the next thing that I do. I'm not going to cover expressions in this one. We're just talking about the lip sync. I'll add those in though, so we can sort of see the whole thing together, and I'll tidy up some of this animation very quickly. Okay, so here it is with the expressions in and everything tweened.
You and he were buddies, weren't you?
And I can still go in here and add a little bit more to here because this doesn't feel quite right. This part's not bad.
Buddies, weren't you? You and he were buddies, weren't you? Buddies, weren't
On this version, I actually need to go in and fix that ooh sound though. So always be looking for things like this. This is just part of the game. The expressions that I'm using here aren't the expressions that were being used by the actor. The actor purposefully is not producing any expressions in this read. If you haven't watched it, make sure you go and watch it. So it can be a good idea to act this out yourself, see how you would deliver the line. Think about what you're internalizing, what you're insinuating to do the expressions, as the expressions will sort of feed how much exaggeration comes from the mouth as well. So it can be a bit of push and pull with between the expression of the eyes and the brows and the mouth. Maybe I'll talk about overall facial expressions in a different video. Just really wanted to talk about how to get the visemes in for the mechanical aspect of doing the mouth movement for this one. So I know this is a pretty heavy topic and I've tried to cover a lot in a short amount of time. So let me know if you do have any questions down below in the comments, and I'll try to answer as many as I can. If you did find the video useful, make sure you chuck a like on it. And if you'd like to see some more animation sort of tutorials around Metahumans, let me know what you'd like to see, and I'll put something in the pipe coming up in the future. Thanks again to our sponsor for today's video, Class Creative. Make sure you check them out with the link in the description. That's it from me though. Thank you very much for watching. We'll see you in the next tutorial. That's it for this tutorial. If you found it useful, make sure you leave a like so other people can find it. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe, as we're bringing out CG and illustration tutorials every week, just like this one. Become a patron and access tutorial assets, bonus content, a private Discord, and more by clicking the link below.